When everything fell apart, God held me together. When the ground gave way. There comes a moment in life when everything you built, everything you trusted, everything you leaned on begins to shake. Not slowly, not politely, but suddenly. The call you never expected. The diagnosis you weren't prepared for. The betrayal you didn't see coming. The door that slammed shut without warning. 1 minute you're standing. The next minute, you're falling. And what makes it worse? You did everything right. You prayed, you planned, you worked hard, you stayed faithful, and yet everything still collapsed. That's the part nobody prepares you for. We're taught that obedience prevents storms, but what if obedience leads you straight into one? There is a kind of breaking that doesn't just hurt your feelings, it shakes your identity. You start asking questions you never thought you'd ask. God, where are you? Why now? Why me? Did I miss something? Silence feels louder than thunder, and in that silence, your thoughts grow heavy. Fear whispers, this is the end. Doubt whispers, maybe God left. But here's what you couldn't see. While everything was falling apart around you, God was holding you together within. You didn't lose your mind. You didn't give up. You didn't walk away. You bent, but you didn't break. And that wasn't your strength. That was grace. There's a kind of strength that doesn't come from confidence. It comes from surrender. When you finally reach the end of yourself, that's where faith begins to breathe. You thought you were surviving, but heaven knew you were being rebuilt. Brick by brick, layer by layer, not into who you were, but into who you were meant to become. See, sometimes God allows collapse because what you built couldn't carry your calling. Sometimes He removes stability so you'll discover sovereignty. You called it falling apart. God called it recalibration. You called it abandonment. God called it alignment. There are seasons when God will let everything around you shake just to prove that He is the only unshakable foundation. And when the job fell through, when the relationship ended, when the support disappeared, when the future went dark, you expected yourself to shatter. But somehow, you didn't. You cried, yes. You questioned, yes. You wrestled, yes. But you're still here, and that still here is not small. That still here is supernatural. Because when everything fell apart, God held you together. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, internally, steadily. He guarded your mind when anxiety tried to invade it. He steadied your heart when grief tried to drown it. He protected your faith when doubt tried to poison it. You thought you were barely hanging on. But the truth? You were being carried. There are moments in life when God doesn't stop the storm. He becomes your anchor in it. You didn't see angels. You didn't hear thunder. You didn't get a grand miracle overnight. But you also didn't collapse under the weight. And that is miracle enough. Because some storms don't come to destroy you. They come to detach you. To strip off what cannot go where you're going. To break off dependencies that replaced devotion. To teach you that your security was never the paycheck, never the approval, never the relationship. It was Him. And when everything else failed, He didn't. You may not have felt strong, but you were sustained. You may not have felt brave, but you kept going. You may not have understood the plan, but you didn't walk away from the planner. That's faith. Not the loud kind, not the platform kind, the quiet, midnight, tear-stained kind, the kind that whispers, God, I don't understand, but I still trust you. And that whisper moves heaven. This is the part of the story most people skip. They celebrate the breakthrough, but they don't talk about the breaking. Yet it's in the breaking that you discover who is truly holding you. You discovered something in that season. You are not as fragile as fear told you. You are not as alone as silence suggested. You are not as forgotten as pain implied. Because if God had truly left, you wouldn't still believe. The fact that your faith survived what tried to destroy you is proof that God never loosened his grip. When everything fell apart, he tightened his hold. And maybe that's where you are right now, standing in the rubble of what used to be, looking at pieces of a life you once recognized, wondering how it all collapsed. Hear this clearly. God is not intimidated by your ruins. He builds best from broken ground. And what feels like the end is often the clearing of space. Because sometimes God doesn't patch the old life. He prepares you for a new one, not built on circumstances, but built on Him. And that foundation cannot be shaken. When God felt silent, but was working. There is a silence that feels holy. And then there is a silence that feels terrifying. This was the second kind. You prayed, and nothing changed. You fasted, and nothing moved. You believed, and nothing shifted. Heaven felt closed. Doors stayed shut. Answers didn't come. And the hardest part wasn't the pain, it was the quiet. Because when God speaks, even correction feels comforting. But when He is silent, your mind starts filling in the blanks. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe He's disappointed. Maybe I've gone too far. But silence does not mean absence, and stillness does not mean inactivity. There is a kind of divine work that happens underground. Seeds do not grow in applause. They grow in hidden soil. Roots do not form in spotlight. They form in darkness. And what felt like abandonment was actually development. God was working in places you could not see. While you were asking for relief, He was building resilience. While you were asking for answers, He was strengthening endurance. While you were begging for the storm to end, He was teaching you how to stand in it. Faith that only survives when prayers are answered is not yet mature. But faith that survives silence, that kind shakes hell. There were nights when you laid awake staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, rehearsing fears, trying to predict outcomes, and every scenario ended badly. Anxiety paints worst-case futures in high definition. But God writes better endings in invisible ink. You thought nothing was happening, but heaven was recalculating. He was protecting you from doors that would have destroyed you later. He was delaying things that would have crushed you prematurely. He was removing people who could not go where you're going. But removal feels like rejection when you don't see the map. Silence feels like distance when you don't understand the strategy. Yet even in that silence, you kept praying. Not perfectly, not eloquently. Sometimes all you said was, "Help." Sometimes all you had was tears, and heaven understands tears fluently. There are prayers you whisper, and there are prayers you weep. Both are heard. Both are powerful. You measured God's presence by emotion, but God's faithfulness is not emotional. It is covenantal. He does not fluctuate with your feelings. He does not retreat because you question. He is steady, even when you are not. You felt weak. But weakness is not failure. It is the birthplace of dependency. And dependency is where intimacy grows. When everything fell apart, you stopped pretending to be strong. You stopped trying to impress heaven. You stopped performing faith. You just needed Him. And that raw, desperate dependence, that is where transformation began. There are parts of you that comfort could never refine. Only pressure could. Only loss could. Only silence could. Because in silence, you confront yourself. You confront your fears, your pride, your insecurities, your misplaced trust. You discover what you truly believe when nothing confirms it. And in that hidden season, something powerful happened. Your faith stopped being borrowed. It became personal. Not your pastor's faith, not your parents' faith, not your church culture. Yours. Tested, wrestled with, cried over, doubted, questioned, and still chosen. You didn't get instant clarity. You didn't get immediate restoration, but you gained something deeper, unshakable roots. The storm still raged, but you weren't as fragile as before. The silence remained, but it didn't terrify you the same way, because somewhere in the quiet, you realized something. If God brought you this far, He wasn't going to drop you now. You survived the initial collapse. You endured the silence. And now, you were different. Still hurting, still waiting, but different. More aware, more surrendered, less dependent on outcomes, more anchored in Him. That's what silence does when you don't run from it. It reshapes you, not loudly, but permanently. You began to understand God is not just the God of breakthroughs. He is the God of becoming. And becoming is rarely comfortable. It requires stretching, pruning, refining. And refining involves fire. Fire does not destroy gold, it reveals it. And the very thing that felt like it was burning you down was burning impurities off. You were losing things, but you were gaining depth. You were losing certainty, but you were gaining trust. You were losing control, but you were gaining surrender. And surrender is where real strength lives, because control exhausts you. Surrender empowers you. In silence, you discovered God was never absent. He was just deeper than your expectations. Not louder, deeper, not flashier, stronger, not immediate, intentional. When everything fell apart, He held you together. And when He felt silent, He was building something in you that noise never could. You may not have seen movement, but roots were growing. You may not have seen doors opening, but character was forming. You may not have seen progress, but capacity was expanding. And soon, what He built in you would sustain what He brings to you. Because blessing without preparation crushes people, but blessing with preparation elevates them. And you were being prepared, silently, patiently, powerfully.